single individual decision-making. The second level is that of the bad barrels. The classic example here is when a broken or toxic corporate culture may legitimize or justify organizational wrongdoing in always within organizational boundaries. There is sometimes a third level is explored, that is the one called of the bad sellers. That is when the macrocultural or institutional environment may again legitimize misbehavior. In this last case, misbehavior may emerge in multiple organizations in the same time, but watch out, independently on the influence that these organizations may bear one on the others. So in summary, what we want to say here is that the literature on organizational wrongdoing never accounted for the interorganizational dimension of the phenomenon. If we instead look at the literature on interorganizational relationships, we realized that it is not very, let's say, not much helpful here either, because interorganizational relationships are normally studied more for their advantages than for their disadvantages. For example, I guess that all automotive scholars came to agree that interorganizational relationships prove efficient and effective in the development and production of complex product that need the integration of diverse spheres of knowledge and resources. Why? Because they establish a division of labor according to the specialization of work of actors involved in interorganizational relationships that may have benefit, for example, I don't know, development lead time, time to market, and produce in general positive output. The only thing that this literature clearly states is that governing interorganizational relationships is quite a delicate task. For example, in deciding how much to outsource in terms of knowledge or knowledge and task or just task, companies may pragmatically adjust in order not to lose control on product development capabilities, for example, or control on the industry structure. Some works in the field of interorganizational relationships focus then in particular on the analysis of the network organization as a specific mode of structure and mode of governance that is different from market and hierarchy. This literature states actually quite clearly that the network organization may bear functionalities and dysfunctionalities. But when talking about dysfunctionalities, it doesn't configure negative outputs. It doesn't study wrongdoing specifically as a possible negative output of the network organization. Classic example of dysfunctionalities that the network organization may have are network failure or underperformance. And what we mean with failure doesn't have to do with the output of a network organization. It just has to do with the fact that the network organization may fail when it ceases to exist. That is what is entailed with conceived as failure. So, but this is just to say that the pragmatic or concrete difficulty in eradicating interorganizational wrongdoing may also find an explanation in the clear gap in its theoretical understanding. So we decided to explore this broad research question through the analysis of the Dieselgate scandal. We identified, let's say, theoretically selected it as an exemplary case for two main reasons. The first one is its judicial unfolding, and the second one is its concrete substance. So since I know that these empirical matters are public knowledge, I will just mention some details that are relevant for this presentation today. So as we all know in the fall of 2015, the US Environmental Protection Agency issued 2 notices of violation to the Volkswagen Group, alleging that it has manufactured defeat devices and then installed them in its 2-liter and 3-liter diesel vehicles marketed in the US. What followed is that the Environmental Protection Agency, with the help of the California Air Resources Board, opened extensive and massive investigations, international investigations in the matters, with the specific aim to understand how the defeat device could possibly be implemented and under which roles and responsibilities. So these investigations were based on the collection of Volkswagen Group internal documents, even emails, minutes of meetings, agendas, calendars, and a number of 100 interrogatories per defendant. And watch out that in this case, the defendants were multiple defendants, because we had Volkswagen Aktiengesellschaft in Germany, Volkswagen Group of America, Audi Germany, Audi Group of America, the same for Porsche, and the same for Bosch. So the fact that the Dieselgate attracted so much judicial attention solved somehow the biggest problems still today, for scholars investigating matters of organizational wrongdoing. That is the difficulty to access to quality information and factual data about how things unfolded in the wrongdoing. Okay, indeed, the investigations led to, put very simply, to a civil litigation and a criminal litigation opened in January 2016, both ended in January 2017. And in particular, all trial proceedings related to the civil litigation are publicly available to the database PACER, that is the public access to the court electronic records. And there are currently more than 8,000 documents concerning the Dieselgate in the PACER database for the civil litigation. For what concerns the criminal litigation, many, like the documents are under seal, but US authorities decided that the most important documents had to be publicly available. And these are the criminal indictments for entities like Volkswagen AG and single individuals like executives or top managers in Volkswagen who played an important role in the scandal implementation, and the plea agreements when reached. So the second reason why the Dieselgate is an exemplary case to study interorganizational wrongdoing deals very much with its concrete substance. And I don't know, in this case, since we are scholars studying the automotive industry, maybe I can skip this slide. You tell me, you decide. Otherwise, we can repeat its functioning briefly, I don't know, in 3-4 minutes.
We'll go briefly. Those are less.
We go for it. Okay. So basically, the defeat device takes advantage of the fact that modern automobiles are cyber-physical systems made out of mechanical components as well as electronic components. Okay, so of course, I'm not an engineer myself, so maybe my lexicon is not very specific, but we've consulted, Francesco and I consulted mechanical, electronic engineers, and absolute mechatronic and people dealing with control strategies for software development in order to understand the functioning, although maybe my vocabulary is not super specific. Okay, so for what is of interest in our research, the electronic components are small computers located in the vehicles, performing all sorts of tasks in order to make cars run. Among these computers, the most important one is the engine control unit, because it controls nearly all operations of automobiles' engine behavior. So the main task, the task of the ECU, is to assure the best driving performance from time to time. And how can the ECU, this is how I tell myself the story, how can the ECU decide how to operate the engine from time to time? Based on the electronic inputs that it receives about the driving, internal and external driving conditions from the sensors that, as small computers are located in the cars, are also located in the modern automobiles. So there are sensors all over the cars that sense, for example, barometric pressure, the temperature, the speed, and the steering wheel angles, for example, and that communicates those driving conditions to the ECU in the form of electronic inputs. Then the ECU, as a computer, is equipped with a software which elaborates those data, and based on the data it received and the way it elaborates it, decide how to operate the computer, the engine. So the defeat device was nothing more than software lines, so software codes, part of a module of the ECU. So the defeat device was hidden in the ECU softwares. The functioning was the following. When the sensors communicated to the ECU the driving conditions that were those typical of the governmental lab tests, then the ECU that the defeat device could understand that the car was driven on a dynamometer and operated the engine in the so-called dyno mode that was basically in an emission compliant way. When instead the ECU the defeat device could understand that the car was on road, then it told the engine to operate differently in a road mode that was not emissions compliant. And this is true for all the specific applications of the defeat device. Indeed, it is normally addressed as a single defeat device, but actually it denotes a whole family of defeat devices, because there are different generations and different applications, of course, determined, of course, by the different vehicles models with the different or specific, we can say, internal combustion structures and emission systems. So whether the defeat device, for example, was applied to a lean NOx trapped in the 2-liter engines, or to a selective catalytic reduction emission system with the AdBlue tank in the 3-liter engines, the logic of functioning was the same, the dual strategy mode, on road, on test benches. So briefly, this is our starting point. So briefly, how we investigated the topic. Of course, we referred massively to the judicial documents in order to reconstruct facts in an interorganizational perspective. So we referred to trial proceedings in order to understand how the defeat device was developed, with a specific interest for the interorganizational dimension of development. Then we supplemented those materials with interviews where we tried to understand the hows and whys the defeat device came to have such a development. And here are the findings. We start with the findings. Here you see that the last circle is actually the first circle of this slide here. That is when the Dieselgate publicly broke. And what we're going to focus on right now is what happened in the years before concerning its development. I hope this is super clear. So I don't know if there are questions or comments so far, or we want to say everything at the end.
Just a question of understanding.
Open your microphone.
I just have a question of understanding. In 2007, you have contestation. What does it mean?
Yeah, so we're gonna reach that point in a few minutes. Yes, okay. Yeah.
So forget the question.
But we start in 2005. So basically, as we all know, in 2005, Volkswagen publicly admitted its ambition to become the first automaker in the world according to the number of cars sold worldwide. The group knew that in order to achieve this goal, it had to expand in the US market. The diesel technology, it decided at the high strategy level, it decided to pursue this goal through an apparently breakthrough technology in the diesel science. That is the Entwicklungsaufgabe 189, that is a new diesel engine platform it was working on since a while. Okay. The problem is that the top management tasked the engineers in the development of this engine with a very challenging task. Namely, they had to complete the development of the EA 189 that needed to result in vehicles that were marketable in the US market as green, cheap, and highly efficient. So the first technology solution that the engineers proposed in order to be compliant with the newer and stricter emissions caps that were in place in the US was the selective catalytic reduction system. And one clarification here is necessary. Here we are talking about the defeat device development for the 2-liter engines, because it was the first generation, let's say, of the defeat device for this kind of engines, because it was the first one. So engineers basically in the development advocated actually quite strongly for the CSR. Why? Because it was at the time the most efficient method, after treatment method, to reduce emissions. The problem was that it was quite expensive. So on average, it would cost Volkswagen $350 per vehicle. So the management dropped this hypothesis, refused this proposal, and considered then the top manager that also advocated for the selective catalytic reduction system decided, after the rejection of this solution, to retire. It was the time of the alliance between Volkswagen, Daimler, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, of the Blue Tech Alliance, or ADI Blue. Let's say. So the second proposal by engineers, and we are still in Volkswagen here, concerned a cheaper nitrogen oxide trap. So this kind of after treatment emissions reductant was for sure cheaper, than the CSR. So it responded quite sharply to the budgeting constraints, but it was less effective in reducing emissions, and moreover, it resulted in less fuel efficiency. So it did not actually respect other important constraints for the management. So the NOx trap was also refused as a technological solution to meet in a legal manner the Tier 2 emissions caps. So in a meeting in November 2006, the idea of the defeat device was actually proposed and was accepted by managers in Volkswagen. Soon after, in the same days, judicial proceedings testify about the involvement of suppliers in the defeat device development. But let's stop here about the factual reconstruction, because it is time now to theoretically comment what happened here. So the context of the defeat device development was a super normal context of engine control unit software development. The software as a complex product was developed in a joint huge endeavor of multiple actors. There was, of course, Volkswagen and a number of suppliers devoted to the development of certain functionalities according to their specialization. Okay, in this case, we have to think about, at least, again, this is how I explained to myself the structure of the software. So it is a complex product made of different modules that, as any mechanical complex products, needs to be integral at the end of the day. So every actor that was involved in the network of developing the ECU software worked according to its specialization with a certain division of knowledge, resources, tasks, because this was like a perfectly rational and efficient way to develop it as a product in a resource-based view, in a transaction cost economics view. The perfect functioning of this effort, our informants told us that there have been numerous meetings to accommodate this, and so that everybody working in the network that worked on this project knew what the others were doing, according to which timeline and according to which roles and responsibilities. So we are in a context of big interdependence and of deep relational embeddedness. Indeed, we know that the automotive industry is one of those cases where the promises of modularity were actually unfulfilled, because a deep level of coordination was actually required here. And this is the context of ECU development. If we look at more specifically to the defeat device development, the judicial sources tell us that 3 actors in this network were identified as playing an important role in the cheating scheme. And these were Volkswagen, of course, Bosch, and IAV, that is Ingenieurgesellschaft Auto und Verkehr, and was an automotive engineering consultancy company based in Berlin. Okay. In this network, composed by 3 actors, Bosch had a very important position for a number of reasons. First, Bosch wrote the software code. and had the IP on the software code. As a consequence, Bosch acted as a system integrator for the ECU development, meaning that it had to collect all the functionalities and all the modules produced by other actors, translate them in software code, complete the software, integrate it with the hardware of the ECU, and then supply the ECU to Volkswagen. Indeed, we all know that although judicial sources, for what was in their interest at the time, tell that Volkswagen Ambition was rendered public in 2005, and then the development of the diesel engine started in 2006. This is not how things go in the automotive industry. So in order to develop a new engine platform like the EA189 and a new software platform like the EDC17 from Bosch, the two started to jointly develop them years before, as soon as 2001. For what concerns the software in particular, Bosch started to develop it in a strict collaboration, in an unusual, this is the way that authorities define it, in an unusually strong collaboration with Volkswagen, because we are in a case, of course, of technological interdependence. The EA189 couldn't operate without the EDC17. And vice versa, the EDC17 would have no market without the EA189. So we decided then to focus on the inter-organizational, in our analysis, on the inter-organizational network relationship between Volkswagen and Bosch as the most relevant in the triad of actors which developed the defeat device. We dropped IAV also because Volkswagen was the majority shareholder. So Volkswagen was the owner of IAV, and there is a bunch, like there are works stating that these nullifies the real difference, even in legal terms, between the parent company and IAV. So we focused, it was a decision to focus on Volkswagen and Bosch. Now, wrongdoing emergence. This is the V-cycle. What you see here is the V-cycle as that is the standard control strategy for automobile ECU software development. Without providing too many details that are not necessary now, what it tells us is the structure of the division of labor connected to the development of an ECU software, and as a consequence of the defeat device as a module of the software. So basically, first are set, the system requirements are, the software requirements are set at very high strategic level. Namely, we want a car in a thought time from now that is green, cheap, and efficient. That's all. Then, on a different level, here we are in the engineering development. Of course, engineers need to translate in technically viable terms the managerial strategy. Okay, so here is when they proposed the selective catalytic reduction technology or the Linux trap technology, and at the end proposed the defeat device technology. Just to give you an idea, here there are people, when building an ECU software, there are people from the development department, then powertrain development, engine development, and we are going from the broad to the more specialized department, diesel engine development, electronic development, interface development. So there are a bunch of people working on the technical translation of the managerial strategies or aspirations. And in numbers, we have to say that there are 15,000, like not 1,500, 15,000 engineers working in development for the Volkswagen brand, not even the whole group. Of course, we know that Volkswagen brand conduct research for all vehicles of the group equipped with 2-liter engines. But anyway, the numbers are remarkable. And this is always at the level of total ECU development. When here, then the proposed solution or agreed solution was the defeat device, then we had to dig into the component level of the software. Okay, so at this time, Volkswagen had necessarily to interact with Bosch in order to insert the software lines into the functionality that hid the defeat device. Okay. And then we reached here the writing of the software codes by software developers. The point here is the following, that when Bosch was involved in the project of the defeat device development, of course, there was an account manager in Bosch that took care of the relationships with Volkswagen that probably needed to know about the defeat device, as well as the project manager taking care of software solution in Bosch for Volkswagen as a client through the account manager probably had to know as well. But the software engineers or software developers who actually wrote the code couldn't realize what they were doing. And this is what at least the interviews, our informants told us. So basically, we have some informants telling us that in a big and structurally formal and bureaucratic organization as Bosch, the first thing is to implement tasks. And sometimes software developers taking part to these complex software development projects brought lines of code without knowing if those lines of code, and this is what they told us, ended up in automobiles or on a shuttle. And although a good practice was that everybody taking part to a project had a clear overview of the whole project, this was almost half a miracle. And and here I'm citing an account manager. So it was quite clear that normally there were some people that had an overview on the projects developed with the clients in Bosch, but there were other categories of people like engineers, more specifically here software developers, that were not totally aware of why they were implementing their work sometimes. And this is true not only for software developers, but also for engineers taking care of functionality development in the exhaust gas after treatment department in Bosch, because we managed to speak with somebody who developed actually the functionality for the selective catalytic reduction system for the 3-liter engines. And they were like, we couldn't sense that something was weird because we realized that the client, Volkswagen, did not apply our functionality in its full potential, in its full performance. But at the very beginning, we couldn't imagine, we couldn't understand that it was because there was a defeat device in place. So those people were those that actually implemented the defeat device without realizing it. because they were in a position of lack of overview. And this is an inter-organizational problem because people lacking overview were the more distant from the source of information that in these cases is always the OEM. This was also a way to silence contestation. Is also a way to silence contestation at the very beginning, because we know from previous work that engineers and managers sometimes respond to different logics across in network relationships. So then, but soon, let's say that questions from engineers became insistent in Bosch at a certain time. Well, soon after actually. So there were software engineering not understanding the reason why they couldn't insert the software updates to the internal documentation in Bosch, and there were functional development engineers not understanding why the client wasn't applying the selective catalytic reduction in a proper manner. But the questions remained unanswered until one of the workers' representatives in Bosch decided to write a letter to the management asking for clarifications in Bosch intranet. Following this letter, contestations crossed organizational boundaries. Why? Because Bosch, it is of 2007 that a letter from Bosch to Volkswagen stating that applying, like actually using the defeat device, would constitute an offense. And this is always from the judicial documents. The launch of the Jetta, that was the first vehicle model equipped with the defeat device, and that was planned for 2007, had to be delayed. So the Jetta wasn't launched in 2007, but in 2009, it was delayed of 2 years. And this is quite remarkable, because the new emissions standard, the Tier 2 US stricter emissions standard, entered full compliance in 2007. So postponing the Jetta launch meant to Volkswagen not be in the US market. Anyway, despite contestations, by the end of 2007, the management decided to go on with the industrial production of the vehicles equipped with the defeat device, and surprise, Bosch agreed to the project. So after all contestations that were raised by Bosch within and across organizational boundaries, Bosch decided anyway to participate in the project of the scaled production of the defeat device, basically. So let's comment this, because we think that here governance mechanisms of the interorganizational relationships, but the relationship between Volkswagen and Bosch played a central role here. Of course, indeed, Volkswagen and Bosch collaborated to the development of both technologies, inheres, and had a trust relationship one towards the other. But at the end of the day, Bosch is a supplier that has Volkswagen as OEM, as a client OEM. So the nature of the supply was actually a commercial contract. Okay, so there were multiple frameworks or agreements in time, starting 2004, 2005, and then 2006 and 2007, between Volkswagen and Bosch, governing, trying to manage their relationships. But as is standard practice, like for the automotive industry, these were incomplete contracts. So we can even argue if there exists a complete contract actually, but it is not the time. It is not the time. This is even truer for contracts concerning innovative products, innovative technologies, because they couldn't state ex ante what the content of the technology will be in its entirety. So Bosch actually found itself in a situation where, first, it already participated in the wrongdoing emergence. Second, it could delay, for example, it could delay the supply of the ECU to Volkswagen, or decide not to supply it anymore to Volkswagen. But in this case, in both cases, it would have incurred in a contractual delay or a contractual infringement that are normally very costly and very, it should have paid a salty fine, let's say, to Volkswagen. So at this point, the managers took the risk, a rational, everybody. So at this point, actually, that the defeat device was in place, that the wrongdoing was in place, was well known to all people participating to at least the module, to the production of the module of the software that hid the defeat device. Okay, but anyway, it was taking the rational and aware now decision to take the risk, participate in the wrongdoing, and see what happened, let's say. Anyway, not only contractual mechanisms were important here, because the contract, like a commercial contract, can be enforced or not enforced. It's a private contract, okay? So it can be enforced or not, depending on the choice of the parts. So we cannot say how things would have gone if Bosch decided to delay or infringe the contract. This is a scenario we don't know. But then, surely also relational mechanisms of interorganizational relationship played an important role here, because first, not only concerning the specific project of the defeat device development, because Bosch actually was already participating, was already there in the project, but also for the history of collaborative co-development that they had on the EA 189 and the EDC 17, but even farther in time, because they trusted the technological excellence one of the other, and they had even relational interdependence. So they were the first actor the other would go to in order to know what technical innovation they were to be supported, they were to be developed, and so on. So in this case, so if in the first step of wrongdoing emergence, we think that the lack of overview played an important role, in the second phase of wrongdoing proliferation, the lack of inter-organizational network governance incentives brought Bosch to remain in the cheating project. Then, yes, okay. Then the models equipped with the defeat device started to be sold in 2009 until the scandal broke in 2015. In those years, Bosch accepted and participated in defeat device in some updates and adjustments that the defeat devices needed in order to better perform. For example, just to provide you an example, I'm almost done. Okay, in 2012, the lean Knox trap started to have some hardware failures. And engineers understood that it was because the dual mode strategies was the one activated constantly. So the road strategy needed for the dual strategy to be deactivated. So first the car started, let's say started with like being compliant. Then it has like the software needed to deactivate the pollution controls in order to let the car run in a polluting way on roads. And this sometimes caused the vehicles to be on dyno mode too much. So the switch didn't work properly. So instead of fixing the problem of the existence of the defeat device, they decided to fix the problems of the defeat devices. So they skipped this, they changed the logic. So instead of responding to a logic of deactivation of pollution controls, they switched the algorithm and let him function in a logic of activation of pollution controls on dyno modes. Okay. This is, okay, yes, indeed, some of our informants told us that one of the reasons why engineers agreed to remain in the wrongdoing was that the logic was a little bit, okay, we produce the defeat device, we scale it at industrial production, but maybe we can fix it later. And this is, at least in my view, a very common behavior in the field of software development and software engineers. But actually, the problem of the defeat device was never fixed. It was bettered, actually. Why? Here again, interorganizational relationships, management matters may have played an important role. Why? Because the suppliers, technically, according to the commercial contract that Bosch had with Volkswagen, Bosch was responsible for the quality of the ECU that it provided to Volkswagen. But it was nowhere responsible for the use that Volkswagen did of the component it supplied. So from a rule of law point of view, only actors, namely original equipment manufacturers, which ask for homologation, are responsible for the use, in the case of the ECU, of the components that they receive from suppliers. So Bosch had, in this case, no rule of law incentive to actually stop and not perpetuate the wrongdoing. In a nutshell, yes, in a nutshell, we are in front of a process of wrongdoing that is not just a process, but that is configured as a drift into wrongdoing, a drift into failure. A scandal of the magnitude of the Dieselgate couldn't be understood and couldn't be implemented fast one day from the other, but it needed a development of years, a slow drift, what we decided to call as a drift in wrongdoing. We feel like contributing with an organizational to the literature on wrongdoing by providing and proposing an organizational explanation actually of wrongdoing. Indeed, between the level of analysis of single individuals with a focus that is the focus of business ethics, for example, and the level of contextual factors of wrongdoing, there is the meso level concerning the organizational design. Think about all the pieces of scholarly pieces of literature in organization business ethics, which study unethical decision making. and then don't follow up with what happened in the organizations after a wrongful decision has been made. In the very same way, macro explanations of wrongdoing, such as, do not account for differences in wrongdoing implementations by different organizations. Then we contribute to the literature on wrongdoing by providing, let's say, a depiction of wrongdoing as normal, in the sense that the very same mechanisms, processes, practices, and procedures that in our case produce right doing also produce wrongdoing. Then a secondary contribution is, of course, also to the literature on interorganizational relationships and network organizations, because since de facto the organization design that we explored is a network organization, we show what are possible interorganizational network mechanisms of wrongdoing. And this opens up a big, I don't know how to say, Pandora vase about the conception of what is actually, about the evaluation of what is a network performance. Can we evaluate interorganizational performance in terms of functionality or dysfunctionalities, or in terms of the output that those relations produce? Because we are here, in our case, in front of a perfectly functional interorganizational relation network that, by the way, produced a very wrongful output. But this is an open question and we don't have an answer yet. So thank you, I'm done. Sorry for taking so much time.
No, you're perfect in time. No problem.
Okay.
That's perfect. That was very stimulating presentations, as usual.
I didn't activate my sound. So can you mute your volume? So perhaps there are two persons that will speak first now. One person is Marc Alochet, who is here with us and will make a discussion from an engineering point of view. As you know, Marc Alochet, many of you know, is now with the École Polytechnique as an associate researcher, but it was before in Renault, so he knows very well how the engineering development work, and is very familiar with all the conditions under which interorganizational pressures and contracts so function. So I think he will be able to provide an internal point of view, but also a researcher point of view. And then, of course, Francesco, I don't know if you want to have immediately some contribution to, how do you want to go? Do you want to wait for Mark discussion, or do you want to speak first?
Are you referring to me?
Yes, we don't hear you. Do you want to speak first, or do you, or you prefer to?
No, I actually I might react to the questions. No, I don't. You cannot hear me?
Now, yes, now I hear you fine.
Okay. No, I'm not supposed to talk, but
okay.
I can react to the questions if needed.
Okay, very good. So, Mark, please go ahead with this discussion, then we open to the room.
Okay, so thank you, Rachele, for the presentation. It's a very interesting case and a very amazing one. Just from what you presented, I had two surprises. The first one is when you say that the EDC 17 is in fact dedicated to this engine, Volkswagen. That's very surprising to me, because, as you said, this is a software platform. Usually Bosch develop a new ECU with a new software. They try to have many different customers so they can sell as many ECUs as possible. So it's surprising for me that they were only developing this ECU and software for a dedicated model from even if it is Volkswagen Group, with huge volume, of course. But it's surprising for me. Just first point. The second surprise is when you say that the software engineer did not know what they were doing. because at the very basic level, of course, you have very, very specialized engineers, and they develop a very specific function. And of course, they know a lot about the functions they develop. They probably don't have a high-level understanding of the global context. But you need to do some integration. And at one level, somebody knows when they integrate different pieces of software, they understand how it's going to work. As you said, there is some specific lines of software saying, well, in this condition, please don't activate. In this condition, please activate. Even if you have explained later on that there were some dysfunctioning and sometimes you have this dual mode and it was not working properly. But anyway, so again, it's very surprising that nobody, even in the software development team, didn't catch what was happening. That's very surprising. As you said, the account manager obviously was aware of that, and he was taking part in the discussion with Volkswagen to understand what was going on and why to do it and so on. But from my viewpoint, I would have expected that some team leaders of software development would have been possible to understand what was going on. Okay, so it's very surprising for me. The second point is about the respective role of the supplier of the OEM. What is true is that the OEM UI is responsible for liability. And if there is an issue, if there are troubles, the OEM is responsible for any legal issue. But very often the problem doesn't come from the integration part of the OEM, or it's in between what the supplier has done and what the OEM has done. Most of the time, this is in between. Okay, even if, of course, in some cases, it's also very obvious that this is a responsibility of the supplier, but in this kind of very complex and specific issues, it's always sometimes in between. Okay, so actually, from your presentation, actually, what is your conclusion? What you say? You say that they were both guilty. Bosch was the only one responsible because probably even if he's not responsible for the final homologation, which is true, they should not have accepted to develop what obviously was a cheating software without any doubt. I'm sure that many people at Bosch were able to understand that they were going to use it for potential cheating. So there was no doubt about that. Volkswagen is only guilty of that. I mean, of course, I understand your point about inter-organizational discussion on the way it works. And I remember we discussed about the bargaining power of each side during this development, or more generally. I clearly think this is out of the normal bargaining power because Bosch and Volkswagen are very, very close companies. They used to work together for a very long time. And so up to me, it's quite difficult to understand actually where the fault is, in fact. I think that's the main point because probably some other people have some questions.
Okay, then I propose you reply first and then let Francesco also react.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Mark. Your comments are always stimulating. So first question, the fact that the EDC 17 was dedicated to this engine platform. So you're right on the fact that the software was actually a software platform that Bosch intended then to scale to and to sell to different automakers with applications according to their specifications. There's no doubt the innovation of this kind of software was exactly this. Its higher precision for how it was built and its scalability, as well as the EA 189. The point was that before arriving to think about sending it to other automakers, the development, so the very initial development, a co-development, was done with Volkswagen. So we have judicial documents stating that even the documents around the software writings were shared in a very simple Excel files, for example, between Bosch and Volkswagen, and to these Excel files, both engineers from both companies contributed. So we are talking about the very early stages of design and of the conceivement of the EDC 17. Of course, then it was a platform. So absolutely different modules where the modules were different for different automakers. But the fact, our point here is that it is no surprise that Bosch developed it with Volkswagen. Mm-hmm. So when we talk also about like the importance of the relational mechanisms for their governance, it's not that they developed together because of their long-lasting and relationship and repeated exchange in time. So it wasn't absolutely only for Volkswagen, but it was developed specifically having in mind, the EA 189 as an engine platform. Mm-hmm. So everything is blurred here. So we couldn't know what comes before, what comes after, because we can even say that the EDC 17, like the idea of constructing a software platform, came from the idea of constructing an engine platform, for example. So it was not only sold to Volkswagen, but it was specifically developed with Volkswagen. That was, I don't know if I answered. Okay.
If I can add on this last point, actually the platform.
Wait a second, Francesco.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
The platform logics was actually an engineering constraint, played as an engineering constraint. So can you hear me? Okay. I think. Okay. So the platform logic acted as an engineering constraint in a way. Foster this process of drifting, because when they discovered it was too late, there were so many interdependencies that were, let's say, regulated by the platform they had developed together, that the sunk cost of switching to a different system was too high. So in a way, modularity also plays the role of a further element of path dependency towards drift. But to go to the point that Mark, I'm sorry, I cannot see you, Mark. So I don't see your reactions. Here we go. Ciao. Hi. Nice to see you. So at the end, you ask, what is your actual contribution, overall contribution? Well, as you know, when it comes to the Dieselgate and to wrongdoing in general, there are many different explanations. There's also, as Tommaso very nicely put in his report, a regulatory pressure that ended up that couldn't, according to Tommaso, and couldn't ended up in this, let's say, wrongdoing. What we wanted to add to explanations of wrongdoing is a piece that, according to us, is necessary to understand the process leading to the scandal, leading to the wrongdoing and eventually the scandal. So our empirical observations show that neither considering only environmental pressures or just decision-making within Volkswagen could fully explain the scandal. So our contribution to empirically and theoretically is adding this interorganizational layer as a mechanism for explaining wrongdoing, because there are many wrongdoing situations. This is the boundary conditions. I'm not sure Rachele mentioned it, but of course the boundary conditions of our work is that we are dealing with a complex product that takes multiple actors to be developed, that it's a process that unfolds over years. So it's not one-shot decision, as sometimes happens, that provoke a wrongdoing, but it's a cumulative process that is very complicated. In this process leading to wrongdoing, our intuition is that there was a missing element in explaining wrongdoing. And this missing element is understanding to what extent the division of labor, task partitioning, the fact that these relationships are embedded, and also the contractual provisions are actually catalyzer of wrongdoing and drift. So this is exactly where our contribution lies, which of course doesn't mean that we do not believe that external pressures were important, that individual decision-making is relevant, and etc., etc. I hope I answered your questions.
And
Okay. Sorry.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
if I may add on this, it is customary in research on organizational wrongdoing, trying always not to substitute ourselves as researchers to the investigators, because we cannot claim to have the instruments to understand whose fault is in cases of wrongdoing, because that is, let's say, not our task. And it's also sometimes risky when you have to face like giants like Volkswagen or Bosch. Our research normally comes after, after the investigations are concluded, and we try to understand more which mechanisms were important for its implementation, because it's such a complex case that it deserves, let's say, attention and a full 360 understanding degrees. That it was just to...
I think there is a question by Margherita. Ciao, Margherita.
Ciao. Grazie. Many thanks. The presentation is absolutely super interesting. I had a very specific perspective that was emerging from Rachele's presentation, that one of the actors that was mentioned at one point was the Bosch trade unions, that it was the actor that was asking for clarification, as I understood. And it was the case in 2007? Or I misunderstood the point?
Rachele, Margherita is asking about contestation. Who were contestating?
Yeah, sorry, I need... Tommaso, can you repeat me the question, because I couldn't...
Yeah, Margherita was asking whether the unions were contestating the decision or not. I don't think we have interviews with the unions, actually.
No, we don't have. There are no there is no information about the union's involvement in this. Okay, the only thing that is that we came to understand is the involvement of certain union representatives, so workers' representative in Bosch. So not the unions as institutions or as organizations, but the workers' organizing way of organizing in Bosch played a role, because the main, actually, as a matter of fact, the main whistleblower in Bosch was the union representative for workers in Bosch. So all the unfolding of the scandal was due to him.
Yes, thank you. That was the point, in the sense that what is missing to me in this story is the fact that there is another inter-organization link, I would say, that is between workers in trade unions in Bosch and Volkswagen. It seems that those in Volkswagen were absolutely unaware of what was happening in this story. But in Volkswagen, they have this carta that has this crucial issue, that is information. So to some extent, this story that you were discussing in the presentation, in your research, unveils that information is, as always, is quite ambiguous issue and not contested terrain by the Volkswagen trade unions, since they simply didn't go on following the initial problems issued at the Bosch level. So just to mention that when later on the Volkswagen trade union say, we were not informed, the point is that they simply overlooked what they could use for their information and decisions and position in the company. So, okay.
Yeah, but this Margherita, thanks for this comment, because this goes exactly right to the point we are making about the fact that because it is a network, and because there is this lack of overview that Rachele mentioned before, contestation is, let's say, is muted, or it is by far more difficult to contest when there is such a lack of overview of the whole process. But on top of that, as Rachele mentioned in the presentation, even the contractual mechanism at work was preventing Bosch on Bosch's side from halting the process and say, oh, this is not going to work in this way, even if because there was a lack of incentive basically to do so.
Okay, thank you very much for these first round of question and answers. Anybody else? As I say, I can start any moment. So I will start. Okay, now the first things I was thinking is about your theoretical introduction. So you say there is a lack of research on wrongdoings from network perspective. And I was thinking, I don't know, did you look into crime or mafia studies? I mean, of course, if you look at corporate, there will not be many people looking into that, but crime organization often are networks and do need to cooperate. And I remember, at least in economic sociology, there is this famous author for us, which is Mark Granovetter, the famous critic to Oliver Williamson's theory of the multidivisional firm. And basically, Williamson said, the multidivisional firm is more efficient than the market because of authority, and because you can exert authority over the different divisions, and so you control the transaction cost. You don't need to trust, but you can just by fiat, by power, enforce order. And Granovetter said, well, then you don't know how corporate works, because without companies, big companies, people know each other, and these knowledge of each other creates the trust required for the wrongdoing. So it's because people know each other and they act in band that you have wrongdoing inside the company. And cited different examples. For example, there were audits inside companies to check if the division would apply the standards and whatever, and the information would be diffused, and then the people would organize to avoid that. And it's true that when you work in engineers, you know how many times people, to avoid the control of the company, they can do wrongdoings too. So the perspective is not exactly the same, but there is some thinking about the fact that you need trust between, in the case between Bosch and Volkswagen, the fact that they know each other for a long time, they seem to have stable relations, that create the conditions for doing the wrongdoing. And from a sociological perspective, it would have been much more difficult if it was a Japanese supplier that never been worked before. They would have never tried perhaps to go that way. But because it was Bosch and because they had this long-term relationship and connections, then it becomes possible to make a wrongdoing. I think there is some literature that suggests that trust, long-term relations and cooperation can be source of wrongdoings. Then my second question is, the starting point of this story is always Volkswagen wanted to go to United States. And they wanted to use the diesel technology there, and the standards of air polluting are much more demanded in the United States, so it was a big challenge. But at the same time, the seat device was found in all cars, including in Europe, and if I'm not wrong, it was also used for European tests. So if the story goes by saying, okay, that initially, because if you look at that, that seems very stupid in the sense that, okay, I understand. You want to be the first manufacturer in the world. You want to get some market share in United States, but taking such a risk for relatively small amount of sales and then putting this technology in all the cars we produce, then it seems like a very stupid way of going about the problem. And also the fact that they say, okay, it costs too much. There was this element of your story says the technology that was used by Daimler and BMW, which was the CSR, for us is too expensive. But if the purpose is just to capture market share in the United States, establish yourself, well, it might be a reasonable price to pay from a strategical point of view. So I was wondering if this is the story how it goes, but in fact, this was used to be compliant in Europe as well. So perhaps the wrongdoing is explained by the fact that the problem that Volkswagen was facing in the long term, and the understanding of this problem was that they saw that Euro 5 was coming, or Euro 4, and they knew that that would keep going, and that eventually what they would develop for the American market, which was more in advance on the regulation, would be used for the European market as well. And that eventually they decided to go that way because the other solutions in the long term were not feasible. So that the problem was really the diesel powertrains and emissions rather than just to get into the American market. So that would be my second questions about why they made such a stupid decision. Because if that was their way to solve the problems of diesel powertrains and regulations, overall, that is a bad decision. But at least the risk is worth, they take a risky worth, because if it worked, that would have solved the problems of making the diesel powertrains complying with Euro 6, Euro 7, whatever. If nobody has noticed that would have, and they were quite close to avoid that. That would eventually be a smart move. But just for the American market, it seems very stupid. So that is my second point. Then so what you're looking at is something exceptional, the wrongdoing, but at the same time, it casts you, it allows you to see the normal way of doing business between these companies. So it is a way to get into, and part of your explanation is that the wrongdoing drift because it was perfectly compatible with the normal way of doing business. And to me, the question would be, where is the frontier? So when the people were aware that they were doing something that was exceptionally wrong and might really lead to huge problems, or in fact, there is kind of, these companies are always looking a way of avoiding regulations. Some are legal, some are illegal. So was this, when people were really aware of what, because you say they didn't have the overview, but the fact is that all the car makers are always looking a way of going around regulations, and all economic players do that. The question is here, where is the frontier, and when the frontiers were understood? And I think a very important moment here is this famous decision. How was possible that Volkswagen, somebody in Volkswagen at very high level, decided collectively to engage the second world manufacturer in doing this? Because that is the starting point. That after that, we say Bosch was trapped by the fact that they not expect their main customer to come up with the demand of a criminal organization. They expect to cooperate in making it easier to go around the regulations, but to do something legal is a different stuff. So this first moment of taking this decision is, I think, you didn't. It's like outside of the picture in your stories. There is a time when you say at a very high level, there is this request. And personally, I didn't understand. There were echoes of saying, well, the problem is that they made this request and then the engineering team did not have the choice. It was not possible to say no. So they decided to go that way, but actually at the top, we're not completely aware of the fact that this team was actually going the legal way. Is a typical situation in which you cannot say no, and everybody is not looking at what is happening, and then it's already started and there is no way back. Or they were full conscious at a certain point of time that they asked the team to do something legal, because that's to me wasn't really clear. So how this decision was taken, and was it taken in a way you do your job and you make this happen? I want this a powertrain which is cheap, green, and I don't care how you do it. Or, okay, you tell me it's not possible, and there is this guy who say that we can do that illegally. Then I consciously know that it's illegal, but I say go away, go ahead, and how many people were concerned by this decision? Was really the whole top management, few people? I mean, the starting point to me is very intriguing, how this could have happened. Then the chain reactions is perfectly described and is really fascinating how this works. But the starting point is something peculiar happen, or is usual practice to be in this gray zone in which you play with the rules?
May I ask you, Tommaso, if you're thinking about what happened in Volkswagen or the first decision in Bosch?
I'm thinking Volkswagen, because the first decision in Bosch,
Okay.
if I got you right, it makes sense. So you describe the fact that there is a demand, Bosch is in the contract, they reply to the demand, it's their job to do it, and then eventually they understand that the demand is strange, there are reactions and there is contestation, but then you're trapped in all, also Francesco said, you are contract, you are sunk cost, you trust Volkswagen to do, and then even if you understand this, it's very difficult to get out of this drift. It is typically path dependent, but the starting point is more intriguing. And that's why I introduced this idea of perhaps was not just about America, but was about the future of this powertrain in general, not in premium model, but for all the car fleet, because that is the scenario. And then it makes more sense that such a crazy decision could have been taken. But that was intriguing by the starting point.
Okay, so maybe I can start reacting from your first observations about looking at the. Oh, Francesco, do you want to?
No, please go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. I will eventually complement what you say, please.
Okay. So
very comfortable.
There is literature, and we read the literature on organized crime. It treats the topic of illegal networks and illegal markets, and it's a very fascinating topic by itself. But the vast majority of times the topic is treated in a network perspective. It is treated at the level of individuals. So, and it was not our level of interest. For example, even social network analysis tools are used to understand the mechanisms, for example, of expansion of mafia networks or of Russian mafia networks. And social network analysis tools are used to analyze police data in order to find unidentified mafiosi. So you have a point in saying that there is a whole literature looking at those mechanisms. And of course, trust is theorized as something important in the construction of an illegal project, because normally criminals prefer to deal with relatives, for example, because they trust them, or longtime friends, always because they trust them, and also because they can leverage retaliation on their families, for example, more. So these kind of relational mechanisms are there and are theorized, but they're mostly theorized at the individual levels. And this is already there in the literature on organizational wrongdoing. For example, when moving from emergence to proliferation within and across boundaries of wrongdoing among peers, there are this kind of social network or trust interpersonal mechanisms entering into the picture. But it was not the level that we were interested in. So it would be tricky to apply those concepts at a different level, like not straightforward, at least. Indeed, the first chapter of my thesis is a conceptual paper that tries to translate mechanisms or concept of this literature on the network functionalities of illegal networks in network dysfunctionalities for legal organization. So, because there is a point, but maybe to transfer the same mechanisms from people or illegal markets to organizations in legal setting is not so straightforward. Are those mechanisms like trust?
Yeah, let me add
yes?
on this, then you go on the other question answers. there is, as Rachele said, a granularity issue, and the unit of analysis is in the individual links, as Rachele said. But there is also a question of what matters for explaining the wrongdoing of formal organizations. And you know, the literature that we know about wrongdoing into organization provides a lot of relevance to formal boundaries of organizations. In fact, most of the literature is driven by legal studies that basically study how to make companies accountable for the problems they create with wrongdoing, right? So the formal boundaries point is relevant for a story like the one we are studying. And of course, this is an element that you don't have as a mechanism for explaining wrongdoing in mafia networks in general. And on top of that, our point is that formal boundaries matter, but also that the fact that boundaries are blurring do matter for the reasons that you mentioned before. And when it comes to granovetter and embeddedness, we actually want to make the point that it is the practices that these two companies put in place during their relationships that explain the drift or the lack of incentives to prevent one of the two actors to stop the drift. So it's not only embeddedness, so it's not just a matter of that these people knew each other, but it's also a matter of actual practices they put in place. And this is pretty context independent, I would say. So, okay, then maybe you want to go on the US story that is super intriguing.
So, for what concerns your second point, Tommaso, about let me double check if I got it correctly. You are asking me what is the weight of the new emissions regulations in the US and in Europe in the decision, like as a driver or a trigger for the wrongdoing, or
basically,
when you read the story goes, Volkswagen wanted to get into the US market with the diesel, and the air pollution regulation in the US market are 5 years in advance with the European market. So it was very difficult unless you were ready to invest a lot of money. So what the premium car makers did, but Volkswagen wanted to get into the cheap market. So they did that for the US market. And they did that because they thought they could do it. But my question is, if that is the true, then to me is very retrospectively extremely stupid to do that, because they made a very high risk for what was in the empire of Volkswagen, a relatively small market at the time, even if with potential. And also, if that was the reason, why not accept and pay more? That sounds, you know, the risk and pay more by introducing the premium technology that eventually. But if that was a way to think about future regulation of power, because the American regulation comes 5 years later in Europe, and that they realized that their diesel strategy, that was the strategy to get into, because at the time was the time when, this exactly is the time when Europe decided to make the regulations compliant. I mean, that to make not voluntary targets on CO2 but to just make Euro and CO2 regulation. So they needed diesel desperately to make the CO2 targets that were under negotiation. So perhaps did that play also a role in explaining why they did go that direction? And eventually we found this device in all the diesel powertrains, not only those for United States, but in all, and that actually were used in all these powertrains to make the test. That's my question.
Mm-hmm. So, for sure, we cannot say that the fact that Europe was implementing the Euro 5 regulation didn't play a role in the decision to maintain, of course, the misconduct. But the drift was, like, from an internal and micro point of view, the drift was already there. So it is important that there is this time lag between the two regulations, because the tier 2, full compliance was in 2007. The first Jetta model was in 2009, and the full compliance with the Euro 5 requirements was in Europe was 2011 for light duty vehicles. So by 2011, and also consider that the phase-in compliance in Europe started in 2009. So the defeat device was already on the cars, on the models, and the drift already started. It was one of Francesco and of our points is precisely this. Then when you take a path under certain engineering constraints for complex technological product, it is difficult to come back. So either in terms of fault, even something that has been touched before, even contestations were present, for example, in Bosch since the beginning. And since the beginning, somebody was to raise his or her hand saying, no, I'm not doing this. Then there is the possibility that the misconduct could be avoided. But after having put a foot into it, it is difficult to come back. So from our explanations point of view, the drift was already in place. And from a maybe technical point of view, but here we have Mark to double check us since he's an engineer, the EA189 was an engine platform. The EDC was an engine platform, and we all know that Volkswagen's strategy in engineering terms was to push the logic of car platforms even more. So if we think about the production chains and plants, it was difficult to divide the production for the cars which were for the US market and cars for the European market. I don't know. I'm not sure, but
no, I agree on that. My point is that they also use it for the European test.
Yeah, but this
one thing is to have the deceit device in the engine by design because you want to make economy of scale. But another thing is to activate it both for the American market and for the European market. So eventually they use this technology also for the European test. And by the way, one thing that is troubling is that when you look at the environmental test, like transport environment TCCT, they show that actually Volkswagen was not the worst performer in this test. And many other car makers were actually doing much worse on NOx in terms of optimization. So one thing is this wrongdoing limited to Volkswagen, or as has been said, are we talking about similar strategies that perhaps don't have the same legal implication, but similar strategy that concern the whole industry? Because in terms of optimization of the NOx, the level of company like Renault, it's even higher for Euro 6 than Volkswagen at the test. We're talking about 5-6 times more particles emitted outside the test than in the test. So that looks like perhaps Volkswagen is taking his own way in the wrongdoing, and other ways that have less legal implications. But that problem was more generalized. Anyway, eventually you find these use of this technology in Europe as well, if I'm not wrong.
Okay, so the degree to which you are not compliant with regulations is different from the nature of the defeat device. So yes, some car makers went even beyond in terms of let's say breaking the limits, but the way they did it was deliberate, while the defeat device was a deliberate attempt to cheat. So this is a difference that is relevant in the story, because it's not the same for everybody. So everybody cheated. Everybody went beyond, but not everybody cheated as Volkswagen did. So this is one point. Second point, Volkswagen sold 500,000 EA189 in the US, 11 million in the EU. And the degree of sanctions that he got was incredibly different, right? So I suppose that was a risk that at a certain point was taken, considering a very let's say bold evaluation of the actual risks in Europe. And this speaks volumes about the regulations in Europe, of course, and the ability of our authorities to sanction behaviors like Volkswagen's ones. So, but I want to hammer on a point which Rachele mentioned before, that you cannot say that there was one decision in which they deliberately took the wrongdoing path. I would rather say that there was a point in which they realized that it was too late to switch to another technology. So at that point, they made the educated bet. That was, okay, what's the risk of being caught? And what's the cost of switching? And at that point, the decision was deliberate. But before you got to the point, then you have a drift that they even control. So this is the point we are making, okay? So you cannot say that from the very beginning, they were planning to cheat. And then there is another interesting point about how these companies are organized. Because in the first annual report of the independent compliance auditor, the independent compliance auditor is the guy that the US administration put as a watchdog of Volkswagen's, let's say, reorganization to avoid further cheating. And one interesting point was that they discovered that in the division that Volkswagen had to develop engines and controls for engines, so the defeat device, the people in charge for environmental compliance were within the same team of the people developing the defeat device, okay? So there couldn't be any contestation among, so the guy in charge of saying, okay, the defeat device is compliant, was part of the engineering team that was developing the defeat device, okay? So this is a typical organization design that is conducive of let's say, of wrongdoing, because there is no way of, balancing the two instances. But if you look at the history of how these companies develop products, you discover that compliance with environmental regulations was something that came out as a key variable only in those years. So before, there was no reason to have a distinction, a wall between the two departments. So once again, was it did by design, or was it just a byproduct of an organization design that was not, let's say, designed, sorry for the joke, for the repetition, designed to prevent this kind of wrongdoing? So this is a gray area, I would say. And this, in a way, makes the point that it's very difficult to claim that at a certain point there was a decision. And at a certain point there was actually, at a certain point, I would say, and this goes to your last question, that when they were actually aware. Yes, at a certain point they were aware. Even Bosch people were aware. But our intuition, Rachele, I don't know if I can say that, is that at a certain point, they made an educated bet. But that was a point that, as I said before, was already too late in terms of investments they had made, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not sure I was clear about this specific point.
I can add something to what Francesco said about the nature of the cheating. In fact, business as usual, when you want to apply regulation, is to do exactly regulation, not more, not less. So it means that, for instance, if you're asked to perform a given function in a range of temperature between 40 and 80, probably at 35 you don't do it, and at 82 you don't do it. What is very different in Volkswagen case is that it never works, which is completely different.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So it just apparently works on the test benches, and outside of the lab environment, it never works. Yeah, and this makes it very exceptional, actually. Absolutely. Thank you, Mark, for the clarification. And
anyway, the old car makers, I don't know what solution. I'm not an expert of the solutions, but as I say, you have a very nice table on ICCT that they tested 100 cars, and they came out with a test, and they have the compliance on CO2 and the compliance on NOx of Euro 6 cars, and Volkswagen is just below the average in terms of cheating and of not respecting the norms, and that's true for the other car makers too. So that's in normal conditions, and actually it's quite funny, because if you look at CO2, of course, the bigger the car and the more powerful they are, the more they optimize. But if you look at NOx, where you filter them, and so the mass is not a matter, but is how much money you put in the filtering technology, then the cheapest the car, more they were optimizing. So a Dacia would optimize 6 times, so it would emit 6 times more NOx than usual, but on CO2 it would be much more compliant than a BMW class 7 that would almost be compliant with the NOx, but not. So this is an industry scandal. Then there is a specific scandal about the defeat device, but it's more about the wrong end of diesel powertrains, and the fact that more the regulation was going up, and more became very difficult for the engineer to find a solution to how do I make these powertrains compliant and industry viable. So that's the question, is perhaps Volkswagen Group went to, it went beyond the red line, but the others were like also doing exactly the same things in different ways.
Tommaso, can I say something on this?
Okay,
you are totally right.
That's
you are totally
true,
right.
if I miss.
No, sorry, you're totally right on that. But the point is that Volkswagen suffered from a loss of $40 billion. Okay, so from whatever point of view you look at that is something that was almost killing the company. Actually, if they had the same sanctions in the EU as they had in the US, they would have been nationalized. So you're right. There was a pressure on the industry, and there was also, let's say, an unfair, let's say, pressure that in a way was benefiting some players vis-a-vis others, and we totally agree on that. But the point is that we want to explain wrongdoing beyond the specific industry, and to understand to what extent the network form explains why they got to a point of non-return, that this is a fact, ended up with a loss that nobody in the industry suffered. So in this sense, the case is exemplary, because as you know, this is the only company that suffered from that loss. Sorry, Rachele, maybe I jumped in before.
No worries. And also, if I may add on that, our focus, we need to stress maybe a little bit more, Francesco, that our stress is on the development of the defeat device as a technology, as an innovative technology. So if we look at, it is true that it was then an industry scandal. So from the Volkswagen scandal, we moved to the diesel scandal in proprietary terms. But if we look at the Euro 5 tests conducted on different brands' vehicles, they all, I don't know about Renault, actually, to be honest, but all the others, so the German automakers and also Fiat, used the EDC 17 ECU. So it was the same ECU that Bosch developed with Volkswagen. So that is also a reason why we selected the Volkswagen emission standards as exemplary, because we cannot, you know, there could be a wrongdoing spin-off effect from the relationship from the dyad Volkswagen and Bosch to then the other automakers, because the defeat device used were slightly different according to the car's specific or OEM specifications, but they all responded to similar logic and they were all built on the same Bosch ECU. So that was also an important point that justified our choice, and that to me makes the Volkswagen case different from the others. It always deals with the relationship between Volkswagen and Bosch, and that is the reason why we stress this interorganizational mechanism as important in the development of the defeat device. So it's not even for us a matter of the standard implementation in terms of relationship with regulators or cheating on emissions tests, but more a matter of the development of the technology, basically.
Yeah.
We're running out of time. Partly it's my fault. Are there any other questions? Because there's been a kind of private conversation, a small group. We're losing some people, of course, because we know we are an international network, and Zoom there is time frame that makes it. Some places already very late, and other places working day is starting. So are there any comments or questions on these? What you said, it was a question, is if you think about this deceit device, it's not so difficult to understand out. I mean, you need just to test the cars outside the normal condition to find it out. That's how it was funded, by the way, just by ECCT. They made the test and they realized that the compliance was so. And we know that the car makers systematically look each other for all the technologies. And they take the cars, they open the cars, they make it work, they test it, they give cars to one each other. So if it's possible to hide something like that to regulators and public opinion, I'm not sure that you can easily hide that from the competition. Because competition want to know how Volkswagen is making that level of NOx or CO2 in the homologation test without using SCR. How is that possible? And they take the car, they test it, and they find out that there is something going on with that. And on top, all of them buy the same technologies from Bosch, and they know that this Bosch is the provider, which is why, I mean, the spin-off, I'm not exploring this scenario, but we know that later on, the old German groups were there was a big penalty in, I think in 2018 or 19 of the Indians. They were colluding and that was discovered after the Dieselgate scandal, which I mean, I'm not contesting at all. I'm not talking about the result of your studies are great and very interesting, but I'm wondering about the chain of decision and the scope also of collusion. Is that possible that other car makers were not aware of this technology, and the fact that we find the same technology later on is not the fact of a massive collusion? And if only Volkswagen was fine, is that he had the bad luck of being the only one exporting and selling cars. I mean, of course, there are the other premium car makers, but Fiat, Renault, Peugeot, Citroën, they do not sell cars in the US market. And in Europe, there's been a lot of tribunal trials, but basically only in Germany they got some legal implication, but in Italy, in France, Spain, this is all gone away. That's the reason why it's been treated differently. Not that so I think it's an interesting aspect here is about is just it just really about Volkswagen and Bosch, or is more about, you know, as you say, an industry scandal? I mean, is that a dimension that you might want to explore as well? I was not really thinking about that, but that was my question. How was possible that, I mean, Mark, you can confirm, you know, all the time you take a car and you check out the competitor, if it's a problem and you cannot solve it, but the first things that you do, you just look at the competitor and they say, okay, how is doing? And you have the competencies to find out.
Yeah, sure. But as a competitor, let's say competitors knew. But what would you do? Okay, I'm Daimler. I know. Who am I talk to the regulators, telling that it is easy to cheat on emission tests, as everybody is, like almost everybody is doing, in order to obtain a change on the real driving emission testings and everything that happened actually after the Dieselgate broke. So I'm not sure that you don't do it.
No, I mean the risk Volkswagen. What I'm
that Volkswagen knew that the competitors would know.
Yeah.
When they go that way, you know, it's not just, okay, we hide it, we hope that everything's going fine, it's a big secret. This is too big to just, I mean, it's, competitors would eventually know that if they were the only one, but they were not the only one. Eventually, everybody was doing the same. So would be also, I mean, an interesting aspect of that is that a story that was all Volkswagen, that was specific to them, a story that the European automotive industry is happy to keep that way, and also Volkswagen has no interest, you know. And rather than making, because there was an attempt to make an European scandal, but then eventually this is, I mean, from a legal perspective, this is gone.
Yeah,
nobody seems responsible for anything, with the exception.
Yeah, I see your point, but Rachele, maybe you want to turn off the because we hear both of you on. Beside what Rachele said, that it's not always easy to say that your peers are cheating because you're never sure you're not doing the same, and at the end of the day, it's industry practice, right? So I totally buy that argument, and I do believe that there is an issue in Europe with unbalanced representation of corporations and citizens' rights. So in fact, we have a research project that you know exactly on this. So there is a massive problem, ethical problem in the automotive industry. But we also know that in those years, Volkswagen turned from being a leader to being a follower in terms of diesel technology, and because the common rail. And they didn't want to follow up on the common rail at the very beginning. And I believe that, as Rachele said, the technology story is interesting here because technology and the fact that Volkswagen wanted to leverage on platforms, on modularity, and they wanted to exploit the technology they had plays a role. So maybe competitors were developing the common rail. They had different market segment to serve, and they were ahead for a certain period of time in terms of performance. So this might be another point.
And also, maybe sorry, okay. I didn't stress it enough, but it is important to mention that the mechanisms that we referred to were like normal and not deviance from how things go normally in the automotive industry. So the validity is not necessarily in the case that we analyze that is just, let's say, an exemplary case, but it's an analytical validity of the constructs that we came up with. So the same constructs or the same mechanisms of wrongdoing can actually happen in other cases. So we absolutely don't say that Volkswagen is exceptional as a case. It is exemplary, but the validity of our findings is in the analytical categories. So for sure, even in other automakers in their relationship with their suppliers, be it Bosch or not Bosch for the ECU, there were in place the very same mechanisms, of course. The agents were different with their agency, so the agency was different, but the mechanisms were possibly there also in other cases. I don't know if
Tommaso is challenging us exactly on that. Tommaso, and this is a very interesting, important point we have to consider when refining the paper, because we have to show that our constructs or explanation complements the other stories, and on the other side, the counterfactuals. I mean, we have to show that the other stories do not fully explain the wrongdoing. So I think this was Tommaso's points in pushing us on.
Mark, do you want to have a final word on from your perspective? You don't have to.
There is Bunche.
Holger, you want to ask a question? Open your mic. We don't listen. We don't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear. Maybe you have to.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
If you can hear me well, good morning from Japan. First of all, this one point is I'm always looking at this from the perspective of who gains what. So I'm not really clear what was in for Bosch in this endeavor. So Bosch has, from my own research, also some monopolies on some technologies, and Bosch is huge, and Bosch is often dictating the conditions of contracts, etc., to Volkswagen. It's not the other way around. Volkswagen, if you talk to people at Volkswagen, they always talk of the kingdom of Bosch. So they dictate on which condition they are supplying things, not the other way around. So they are too big. So what was in for Bosch to contribute to this scheme of cheating? This is not clear from my perspective. What did they really hope to achieve by that?
You want to go, Rachele? Because thank you very much for the question, because Rachele and I discussed a lot exactly about this precise point. Why Bosch, with this enormous power they had, and on top of that, they also had the common rate. That was the alternative technology in place. So why is that? So Rachele, maybe.
Okay, so Holger, you're saying that actually Bosch has a higher bargaining power than Volkswagen in their negotiations. Did I get it right?
Sometimes yes, or just from I visited often Volkswagen and talked about relations, so supplier relations, and they always, not just one person, often told me the kingdom of Bosch. So they are more or less deciding about the conditions of the contract. We are not able to push Bosch into contracts because we have the bargaining power, we have the volume. So to say, you are supplying us with this technology, or we go to another supplier. So there might be also no other supplier.
Rachele, maybe I can react on that. I think Bosch was evidently in a prominent position. They had a very strong bargaining power, but this is exactly our point. Bargaining power is not the only driver of this kind of relationships. And the fact that for a long period, there was opacity, or there was lack of overview of whether this was legal or not, produced the effect of investing in the project. So when everything became clear, then Bosch maybe had some stake and had some interest itself and then on top of that, because of the legal aspects that are involved, Bosch also knew that it was very tough for institutions to chase Bosch itself. And actually, Bosch tried to got a letter from Volkswagen to be exempted from the liabilities of the case. But I think our story explains what was going on exactly for this reason. It's not just bargaining power of the relative position, it's the summing up or the drift of the relationship, whereas opacity, task partitioning, the kind of contracts you are signing, all make are elements of the puzzle that then eventually bring to the outcome.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Rachele, final word?
Yeah, final word. Just on this. Sorry, I had a problem with the stereo of the computer before, but we're okay now. And yes, and also we considered actually at the beginning the issue of the bargaining power and of the different power positions of Volkswagen and Bosch in their negotiations. But then interview after interview, we realized that yes, Bosch had the expertise on the technology, so had the technology that Volkswagen needed in this case. But in the same way, and as in the opposite direction, Bosch needed Volkswagen to sell this technology. Indeed, it is true that Bosch is one of the main supplier we know for the automotive globally, but its first client is Volkswagen, and not only for the ECUs, but also for a number of other components of the car that Bosch is anyway very interested in selling. Some informants described their relationship as hate-love. So, and it's quite, it is quite remarkable that they decided to describe their relationship, something that is so emotional, because they hated each other, but they needed each other on different levels, the technological one and the market one. So they were so much entrenched, so much interdependent, that then we decided to drop, let's say, this hypothesis of power imbalances. Because according to the areas that we considered, so market output or technological capability, their relationship was actually balanced. And this reflected in the contract. So many people actually in Bosch told us that anyway, like bargaining with Volkswagen was really a really challenging task, and more challenging than bargaining with other automakers for, of course, the number of cars sold. It's also for a matter of like market reasons. So yeah, that's all.
Okay. Well, that was a really fascinating discussion, and I think we are all looking forward to read the final PhD and the book, I believe, because that is worth publication of the results. And I think he opens a lot of grounds and theoretical debates and understanding about how this industry works. I mean, there are also many layers, and I think we also all seen how much rich is your fieldwork and your thing. So great work. Thank you very much. And so I close with 20 minutes late. Sorry, we started 20 minutes late, so that's just physiological. Our seminar. Thank you very much for being with us virtually, and we look forward to see you very soon. And I remember that the colloquium in Brussels is coming up. Many of you have already applied, and if you have not yet, even if we have closed things and the program is almost full, if you forgot to do that and you want to send us a message and see if there's a last-minute spot, we're still open to negotiation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to everybody, and
That's
see you soon. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.